see the cloud melting away, so for quite a few of us it'll be a largely clear night, and that will allow it to turn quite chilly. Temperatures well down into single digits once more, down to 3 or 4 in many rural spots. Out west, though, temperatures will actually start to rise later in the night as the cloud arrives from those weather systems, bringing outbreaks of rain into Northern Ireland. Eventually, that rain will spread into Scotland, but for much of tomorrow, northern Scotland will stay dry and fine. Still 1 or 2 showers close by to Shetland. Here is that rain, though, edging into Northern Ireland for the morning rush hour, so a soggy start here, getting quite windy too, especially on the east coast of Northern Ireland. The west coast of Wales and the southwest of England will see the winds steadily picking up as well. Many central and eastern parts having a dry, fine, if somewhat chilly start to the day. The cloud will increase over the Midlands and then into eastern England as the rain spreads into Wales, southwest England by lunchtime, southwest Scotland up towards the central belt by the end of the day, and also come the middle of the afternoon, some of that rain getting into the Midlands. Much of eastern England will stay dry until quite late on, and same goes for northern Scotland. But in the west, getting very, very windy as well as wet. These western coasts particularly gusty for this time of year. Temperatures again mid-teens, but feeling cooler with the wind and the rain, which will continue to spread into eastern England and eventually into northern Scotland during the course of tomorrow evening. And the blustery and showery outlook will continue. Some sunny spells, but lots of heavy showers through the weekend. Temperatures a little higher, but feeling cooler with the gusty winds.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays continue on the M62, heading west through West Yorkshire. A car broke down just after the M621 exit junction 27. All lanes are back open, but long queues continue heading west of Leeds. Several problems on the M25 tonight. First of all, the Surrey stretch is down to a single lane clockwise. Junction 11 to 12, a lorry caught fire just north of the M3. Recovery work is underway. And clockwise on the western stretch, the inside lane shut just north of the M40, following an accident of long queues back to the M4. Really slow clockwise through Hertfordshire, 22 to 25, not being helped by a breakdown earlier on just after the Homestead Tunnel. In West London, the A315 at Isleworth blocked by an ongoing incident. And on public transport, there are minor delays on the Elizabeth line out of Hayes and Harlington to Reading following a points failure at Maidenhead. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's our summer spectacular. 3 top prizes that have to be won. There's cash. £15,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like this summer. Plus a brand new iPhone 15 with a set of Apple AirPods. And if that wasn't enough, we'll also treat you to some fun in the sun with £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction this summer. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co. 22 days to go, everyone. We're getting through it together. Today, Rishi Sunak has come under fire again, this time for saying that he didn't have Sky News as a child. I mean, apparently that is deeply offensive for people that have absolutely gone without. Can I just say, give me a break. Really? Is this what we're now doing in society? Shaming anyone that apparently has succeeded and created wealth for themselves? Do we really need to have a Prime Minister who's been on the breadline before they can rule us? Give me your thoughts on that. Also, I want to talk to you about political reform in this country. So many of us now saying that that is what we need. Do we? And what would it look like? And get this, I've got not just one, but two Lords on my programme tonight, so it's only fair as well that we debate reforming the House of Lords. Is that what we need? Also, speaking of smaller parties, the SDP have revealed their manifesto, and among it, they say it's time for UK industry to return. Is it? And if so, what would that look like? I've got it all to come and more, but first, the 6 o'clock news with a legend that's Polly Middlehurst.
Michelle, thanks very much indeed, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that Rishi Sunak insists he hasn't given up hope of winning the election, but he has warned voters not to give Labour a blank cheque. The Prime Minister was campaigning in Lincolnshire this afternoon as new figures emerged showing the economy recorded no growth in April. That's something of a setback after his recent claim Britain's economy had turned a corner. The Conservatives pointed to figures that showed there was growth in the months before April, but the Liberal Democrats said Rishi Sunak has utterly failed to deliver on his promises. Sir Keir Starmer said Labour's plan will renew the country.
The one thing that everybody expected and needed from Rishi Sunak was stability after the disaster of Liz Truss. What he's now done is become the latest version of Liz Truss with unfunded commitments. And I think the public know, voters know, that there's a cost to that and they want an alternative. And that's why I'm really pleased that tomorrow in our manifesto we will take a different approach. We will set out the case for growth, for rebuilding, for putting our nation first to go forward.
Sir Keir Starmer. Now, a record number of people have lost faith in British politics. That's according to an electoral expert. Sir John Curtis found that trust and confidence in politics and the overall election system has never been lower. 45% of respondents almost never believe that governments of any party are fully focused on the challenges facing the country, and a record 58% said they almost never trust politicians of any party to tell the truth. That's a 19-point increase from 2020. Scotland's First Minister says there should be another referendum on Scottish independence within the next 5 years. Joining SNP candidate Joanna Cherry on a visit to a supermarket in Edinburgh, John Swinney denied suggestions he'd been downplaying the question during his campaign. He said the issue of independence relates to the main concerns of voters, including the cost of living.
What's important is that when I look at the performance of other small European countries, independent countries, I see them delivering a stronger economic performance and stronger public finances than the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom model is broken. It is absolutely broken. And the false debate that we're having in this election campaign is demonstrating that. I'm trying to say in this election campaign that there's £18 billion worth of spending cuts that essentially are baked into the Conservatives' projections about the future of the economy, and the Labour Party accepts that. And we cannot bear any more austerity within Scotland.
Meanwhile, MSPs have backed Scottish Government plans to release prisoners early to ease pressures on the system. Over 500 prisoners will be released in 4 waves, starting at the end of this month. Only inmates serving short sentences of under 4 years who have 180 days or fewer to serve will be considered for release. The Justice Secretary, Angela Constance, announced that move last month following a spike in inmate numbers and concerns about the capacity of the prison estate, as it's known. Ms Constance was also clear that the emergency release is part of a plan that requires long-term thinking. Now to France, where the president is vowing to fight on, even if his party suffers losses in the snap election he's called. Emmanuel Macron says dissolving parliament was his only possible response to the gains made by right-wing parties in last weekend's European elections. He insists the vote will bring clarity to the French public, though polls put the right-wing leader Marine Le Pen in first place, with centrist Macron trailing in third. He's urged political rivals to join him now, forging a democratic alliance against Le Pen's National Rally Party. To the United States now, where the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says some of the latest changes put forward by the terrorist group Hamas for a ceasefire in Gaza are unworkable and therefore the war will go on. Antony Blinken's been studying the latest demands alongside mediators based in Qatar. It's understood Hamas will only accept President Biden's deal if it gets written guarantees from the United States over a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel's military now says around 160 rockets have been fired into the north of the country from Lebanon. Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for those attacks. And lastly, in news here at home, the cooperative bank has had to apologise to customers after they complained of a glitch that saw payments taken twice from some small business accounts. People who took to social media to vent their frustration claimed they were, in one case, £5,000 out of pocket with no resolution in sight. Another said their account had been in overdraft all day, but there was no notification on that from the bank. A spokesperson for Cooperative Bank apologised for the inconvenience to customers and said a correction is currently being processed. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that, Polly. I love that last story there. Electronic transactions, you see, so many people desperate to refuse cash in this day and age. Got to be careful what you wish for because, of course, these things can always go wrong. I am Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you until 7 o'clock tonight. And guess what? This evening I've got not one, but two lords. Yes, I have. I'm hoping that some of their eliteness is going to rub off on me. Let's see what happens by the end at 7 o'clock, shall we? I've got the Conservative life peer, Lord Finkelstein, and I've got the Labour life peer, Lord Glassman. Good evening to you. Both of you, new face to this programme. Eliteness. I don't even know if that's a word. I don't know. Is eliteness a word? If it's not, it is now. Let's see. We like it. We're going to talk about reforming the House of Lords a bit later on in the programme. Get your thoughts coming in on that. You will have some strong opinions, I am sure. As you know, it's not just about us three. It is about you at home. So you can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go on the website, as you already have started doing, gbnews.com/yoursay, or, of course, you can go on Twitter or X, and you can reach me there at GB News. But, of course, 22 days to go until the election. Let's cross live, shall we, to our GB News political correspondent, Catherine Forster, for all of the latest. Good evening to you. I believe that you're in the so-called spin room ahead of the debate tonight. Bring us up to speed with what we're expecting.
Yes, good evening, Michelle. Welcome to the spin room here in Grimsby Town Hall, where in an hour and a half, one of the men that will be Prime Minister in just over 3 weeks, we don't know who it will be yet, but both of them will be talking, 20 minutes given to each of them for an in-depth interview, and then 25 minutes devoted to an audience question and answer session. I'm going to take you for a little tour in a second, but I think it's worth just reflecting on Grimsby, a town with, of course, a huge, proud fishing heritage and a classic Red Wall battleground seat, because in 2019, voters here, this is a heavily Leave voting constituency, voters here lent the Conservatives their vote. The Conservatives currently have a 7,000 majority here, but before then, it was a solid Labour seat going all the way back to 1935. Now, Labour will be hoping and expecting that they're going to be able to pick this seat up. So let's go for a bit of a wander now. I'll walk backwards. I hopefully not fall over while I'm doing it. Just passing, somebody's about to do a broadcast. So if we could just take a look back now down the room, there's a whole load of journalists, as you can see, busy on their laptops in the middle, some familiar faces, Adam Bolton down there, John Craig. You can see at the end there's a live broadcast going on. If you just look up at the ceiling, it's a really beautiful room, very, very old, this building, lovely lights, beautiful paintwork. Let's carry on walking. So let's just scooch through here. And so we can take a look down here now. So on the left, we've got first of the broadcasters, that's Sky, talking to Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth. That's going out live now. Then I think the next camera along is ITV. Then I believe we've got Channel 4. Then the next little spot is us. Then we've got the BBC, and then when we come along round to, that's Peter Cardwell there. Let's take a look down this corridor now. There's another room full of journalists. Probably no politicians here, but basically this is called the desk room, and this is where a lot of print journalists are going to be sitting and tapping up the latest lines as they drop, as those exciting, we hope, things get said this evening. So let's just take a look in here. So as you can see, rows and rows of journalists with laptops all ready to go. If we look round here, there are some snacks, very important. I have to say, not very healthy. Look at this, a load of chocolate, a load of fizzy drinks. If you're after something healthy, yeah, you're out of luck, but plenty of caffeine, plenty of chocolate here. Back to you, Michelle.
Oh, that looks very, very delicious. I do like those behind-the-scenes insights there. Thank you very much for that, Catherine. I've got to say as well, I think me and Catherine have very different opinions on what a beautiful ceiling looks like. I think maybe I might just need to give my spectacles a wipe. I might have missed it. Danny, look, do you think the debate tonight is going to change anything?
No, I'm not a big believer that it changes much. During an election campaign, the split between different parties, so say between Labour and the Liberal Democrats or the Conservatives and Reform, can change a bit. But really, elections are determined a long time before the election campaign by basic things, leadership, the economy, and how long a political party has been in power. Leadership does matter. So insofar as people have not made up their mind about Keir Starmer, I think they've probably made up their mind more about Rishi Sunak. They've seen more of him. There might be, a bit to play for there and a bit to lose. It's quite difficult to comment on these debates. I watched that spin room. I had to comment for the Times newspaper on the last debate, and I had to file everything that I'd seen by 9:15. The debate didn't finish until 9.
Right.
So they've got quite a big job. They haven't got time to stare at the ceiling, so they'll never settle the battle that you've just had.
If they were watching GB News then, they will have looked at that ceiling. They don't need to be gazing whilst they're on the job. I'll come back to Rishi Sunak in a second. But Maurice, your thoughts on these debates?
Oh, they're completely immaterial now. I mean, this thing is done. I don't think anybody is listening to anything that the Conservative Party is saying anymore, and particularly Rishi Sunak. It's just passing them by.
Well, you say no one's listening to stuff that Rishi Sunak's saying. They are, actually. I mean, there's a programme that's going to air. This is the one you'll be familiar with. The fact, do you remember when he came, well, how can you forget, when he came home early from the D-Day situation there? It was for this ITV interview. Well, let me just show you a clip of what is in that interview. Watch.
You are wealthier than the king. What do you do day to day to make sure you're still in touch with the kind of struggles ordinary people face? Have you ever gone without something?
Yeah, I mean, my family emigrated here with very little, and that's how I was raised. I was raised with the values of hard work.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right? So,
Can you give me an example
all
of something?
sorts of things. So, like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV. Okay. So that was something that we never had growing up, actually. But it was lots of things. But again, that's my experience is obviously going to be what my experience was, what is more important are my values and how I was raised. And I was raised in a household where hard work was really important. you had to work very hard, and family was important, service to your community was important.
Now, I've got to say, there's been a massive backlash to that comment there. Apparently, it is offensive to people that have genuinely gone without stuff, whether it's food or whatever, that you'd have a Prime Minister saying those kind of things. I've got to say that, Danny, I have a slightly different view to this, because I don't actually like what's going on in terms of trying to undermine Rishi Sunak because of success that his family, and his extended family in particular, have achieved, or even himself, actually, he's achieved success too. Why are we so willing to kind of desperately shame people for wealth?
I mean, first of all, there are lots of families who have a limited budget, even if they're not objectively poor, say, right? And that's represents a lot of families in Britain who are in that position. And actually, you know, I can relate to that. I think I was the son of somebody quite similar. You know, my dad was an academic, my mum was a teacher, and we certainly didn't go without many of the essentials. We had a lovely life, but at the same time, we didn't buy things like Sky Television. So I understand exactly the sort of things that he's aiming at. In other words, it's people who've got, there's a limit to what you can spend, but you're not objectively, of course, poor. But my father actually was born into a lot of money. His father did so well in the iron and steel business, he was known as the Iron King. He was very wealthy. And when the Soviets moved into his home city of Lvov, he was accused of strengthening the might of capitalist Poland and sent to the Gulag for being an anti-social element, where he lost everything. He came to this country. They lived on a small house on the Hendon Way near Brent Cross Shopping Centre, and where Brent Cross Shopping Centre ultimately was. They had nothing. And this was all because people thought that rich people, the Soviets thought that rich people were part of some secretive elite that was undermining the will of the people. This is very dangerous thinking. So, yeah, I worry when anyone gets othered, even for their privileges. Because unquestionably, my father was brought up in a very privileged way, and I think it's a language we ought to avoid.
Yeah, do you agree?
Yeah, I'll just say, Danny, I just got back from Lviv, which we used to call Lemberg. I don't know if I was there for 10 days in Ukraine. It'd be interesting to see where your family lived. You know, this is all, you know, the emptiness of this election is reflected in the emptiness of the moral outrage in relation to all this stuff, Michelle. So, for example, Boris, at the last election, he was educated at Eton, but he had a common touch. He could communicate with people. Churchill was at Harrow, that was never, Attlee was a public school boy, Tony Blair was a public school boy, all from wealthy families. That's not the point. I think what we've got to look at is the utter ineptitude of Rishi Sunak as a politician. His inability to connect, his inability to...
But then do you think his wealth is contributing to that?
No, well, people would say this. I'm saying that's not the point. The point is he has enormous inadequacies in actually functioning as a democratic politician due to his inability to connect.
It's also because the Conservative Party is so far behind in the polls, and so what's now happening is everyone's trying to find pictures and stories to accompany the overriding story, which is the Conservative Party's losing the general election. And so, you know, if I asked you what was Keir Starmer doing today, or what did he say in his interview, nobody has the foggiest idea, because nobody's actually that interested in that story. I don't think he's all that, you know, he has lots of great things to say. There's lots of great things to say about Keir Starmer's intelligence and integrity, as there is about Rishi Sunak's, by the way. But he's also not a great politician either. At the moment, nobody's that interested in that because the story's all about the Conservatives. So what I would mainly say about that Sky remark, I think Morris and I are really agreeing with each other here, how incredibly banal that is, really. I think you're picking up the most important point about it, which is this attempt to other people because of their wealth. That is definitely of importance and worthwhile talking about. But as an election event, really, are we going to choose the Prime Minister on the basis of whether or not they are slightly maladroit in answering a fairly silly question?
It is a silly question, and I wonder, sometimes I think I had a very lucky escape when I was not elected in Hull, because I wonder if I was being put in these stupid situations by journalists, how would I react? And I don't actually think that I would have the patience to keep responding in a professional manner. And I've noticed, actually, and I don't know if it's just because...
Well, Michelle, that might make you more popular. I mean, if you just genuinely respond. What I'm saying is it was almost painful to witness.
If he said...
But the real story, Danny, is the complete disintegration of the Conservative Party. It seems to be without direction, without ideological coherence. I've never witnessed, actually, a party disintegrate like this in real time. And this is without Labour generating any enthusiasm. I mean, you remember 97, you were around then. Whatever you say, there was a genuine sense of energy and direction about Tony Blair and New Labour. But I've never witnessed such a disenchanted election and such a fundamental disintegration of a great political institution of our lives, which is the Conservative Party.
But this is your party. Do you agree with that?
I basically do, actually. I mean, where I think I'd part with a lot of opinion is to say that it began with Rishi Sunak. I think he made a mistake when he became leader of the Conservative Party, not drawing a line with his predecessors. So the Conservative Party provided 2 prime ministers in a row, whom it then correctly decided for different reasons weren't adequate for the job. It's also done what I call sack its voters. So the Conservative Party has been a sort of party with a solid coalition. It decided it was going to change that to a completely different coalition. It then became a small government party trying to be the party for Hartlepool, where a lot of people wanted more public spending. So I think it's got confused about what it's trying to do, and it's been in power a long time. When you're in power a long time, you're anyway challenged, and that's what's happened, you know, in a nutshell. But it's more serious for the Conservative Party because in addition to having been in power for a long time, in addition to, I think, having these 2 prime ministers that they then got rid of, they don't really know as a party, or we don't really know as a party, what the coalition of support is. The big interesting question is whether that will then happen to Labour in 5 to 10 years' time as well, that it would build this coalition that's so broad, like the one Boris Johnson built in 2019, that it no longer knows exactly who it stands for.
See, I wonder, and perhaps you can tell me your thoughts on this after the break, whether or not the Conservative Party, people like Rishi Sunak, etc., must kind of just regret the day that they ever orchestrated the kind of kicking out of Boris Johnson. I wonder if they could turn back time, whether they perhaps would do things differently. I'll ask Danny to answer that after the break. But also, I want to talk to you. Do you think it's time now to have political reform? Also, as well, the Green Party speaking out today saying we've got to tax the rich more. Goodness gracious me. See you in 2.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Today we've got 2 fantastic individuals who have invented a teddy bear to help children who are suffering with mental health.
Yes, so Lynn and Samantha Crilly came up with the idea for the Trouble Muncher toy following Samantha's own battle with an eating disorder and OCD.
Yes, the teddy comes with a notepad and encourages its owners to write down what's troubling them, and then they can pop the note into the rucksack on the bear's back.
I struggled with mental health most of my life, actually, and oh no, it's fine. I've got one. I feel quite sorry for you. But and one thing I always did was message my mum, and it was a thought disassociation kind of technique. I would message you. Even now, I message you thoughts that come into my mind, but massively when I was younger. And I thought, what happens if you're younger and you don't have this?
Yeah, and I think in today's technology-fueled world, I think we go back to basics, and it just helps them to process by writing it down. Everything's so instant these days.
So it's like an indirect way of telling your parents how you're feeling, what you're going through. Such a great idea. What's the feedback been from parents who have got a trouble muncher for their kids? What have you got any stories?
It's been really good. In one household, he sits on the kitchen side, and I think during the day, the parents, the children put their worries in, or at night, and then they know that their parents will look at it during the day. And it's gone into some schools as well.
You'd imagine you'd want one of these trouble munchers in every classroom, in every school up and down the country, because children who are being bullied, for example, who feel like they can't tell their parents, they're too embarrassed to talk about it. This is such an important tool, isn't it, for children to communicate that?
Yeah, well, you were saying Mum's a mental health counsellor and you had a young child who had Snapchat AI. So you talk to an AI in Snapchat and that's what they talk to now.
The People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, not just one, but two Lords. I've got the Conservative live peer, Lord Finkelstein, and I've got Labour live peer, Lord Glassman. Good evening to both of you. Look, we were just talking about this whole ridiculousness with Rishi Sunak, focusing obsessively, I would say, on the success that he and his family have achieved. Wayne says Rishi Sunak's CV makes him a much better place to be Prime Minister than Keir Starmer. He said, but that being said, if I ever did need any tools, it would be Keir Starmer that I would trust to go and get them. Values are much more important, not what money they did or they did not have, says Sheila. I agree, says Helen. I'm sick of people going on about Rishi's comment. It was his experience. It's his lived experience, I think is the word that we use, and he's entitled to it. Yes, indeed, he is. Cassandra says, unless you're extremely rich, most people have to make choices. That's why we have budgeting and saving. Dave says, I have been a Conservative all my life and I will always vote Tories, but even I can say that Rishi is out of touch. I was just asking you before the break, do you think that they made a mistake, the Tories, by getting rid of Boris the way they did?
Well, I was one of those people who was in favour of doing that, and I wasn't thinking about the party. Boris Johnson's a very talented politician. It's certainly conceivable. I don't think it would have, personally, my view is it wouldn't have, but it's certainly arguable. We could have a discussion about it, that he might have done better politically. My reasoning for deciding he should be removed is I don't think we can have a Prime Minister who can't tell the truth. And I felt that we'd got to the point where we couldn't trust the Prime Minister to tell the truth to the House of Commons, for example, which is, something that we rely on as for our system of government to be accountable. So I took the view reluctantly. I mean, I've always liked Boris Johnson as a person, that he couldn't remain as Prime Minister. But that wasn't a political calculation. It wasn't about how best to win the general election. It was a calculation about the country. And for me, that always has got to come first. As it happens, I think the country would have had a very great difficulty getting past the parties with Boris Johnson, and I think it would have also had a very great difficulty itself getting past the fact that he couldn't tell the truth. So I don't think he would have fared well in the election, but at least we could have had an argument about that. What I don't think is easy to have an argument about is whether it is really you could continue to have a Prime Minister who routinely would send out his press secretary to tell the press and then repeated those things to Parliament, things that were not true, and ultimately got suspended from Parliament for doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, I talk to viewers every day of my life, and the subject of Boris comes up a lot, and a lot of people do feel very betrayed. They feel that they lent Boris their votes. They didn't feel the same sense of injustice or wrongdoing that many people in the Conservative Party did, and I think that it has, I can be as bold to say, I think it has been one of the reasons that many people now feel disconnected to politicians and politics perhaps more generally, because they turned out, they lent their vote to somebody, and then they would say that he was ousted without consultation from those people. Of course, that is the system that we have, which leads me nicely into a little segue. John Curtis, the very respected pollster, he has been speaking out today. Let's have a listen to what he's been saying.
Together with the fact that we're very concerned about the state of the health service, which again is one of the reasons why trust and confidence is low, why so many people are struggling are on low incomes. And also, frankly, the political turmoil we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years. You put all this together, you certainly get a look of an electorate that is certainly concerned about the state of the country and are just wondering, doubtful, whether or not the politicians could turn it around.
What do you think to this kind of collapsing trust for politicians?
Well, if you look at English history, politicians haven't ever enjoyed a great deal of trust. I mean, if you look at the 18th century, 19th century, the lampoons, the contempt. So I don't think it's about that. But this idea that you change the electoral system and that restores trust, I completely oppose it.
So you're talking about... So this is about 53% of people, basically, said that they want to change the voting system to something where smaller parties get a better look in, i.e. proportional representation.
Yeah, and I'm just completely against it, because what you will witness on July the 4th will be, however disenchanted, however low the turnout, a genuine accountability where politicians will be removed. They will lose their jobs. They will be kicked out. But if you have this party list system, which is PR involves, it's only going to intensify the very narrow amount of people go to politics. And the second thing is, at least one of the glories of our system is that there's a link to place. You actually have to go to the place you represent and do your campaigning. The party list will be more of a move towards sort of anonymous globalisation, just the homogeneity of the political class, which people are really disenchanted with. So the problem is not with the voting system. There is a huge problem with the quality of people going into politics, but also we're at the early stages of now dealing with actually being a sovereign democratic country, and it's clear that the politicians aren't up for it. But just to go back to Danny's point just for a moment on Boris, he was a charismatic politician. I mean, he completely like Max Weber would say, he transcended, he talked beyond his party and could connect with people. And there were the three big ideas. One was Brexit, the other was levelling up, and the other was an alternative economic model. And so it's not just about what your coalition's going to be. Essentially, he didn't deliver on levelling up and he didn't deliver on a new economic model. And now there's just a void where the party.
I would have tolerated completely, the failure to deliver on his agenda to the full extent. Right? We could have had an argument about that. That is not a reason for removing the leader of the party. It's the reason why people may vote against the party at the election. This was about the integrity of the office, as far as I was concerned, at least. Politicians have always been untrusted. You're right. When the one prime minister we ever had who was assassinated, Spencer Perceval, when John Bellingham shot him in the House of Commons, the crowd tried to overturn Bellingham's carriage when they arrested him in order that he could run free. And his wife, who was Percival's wife, who was round the corner at the Great George Street, heard the cheers of the crowd. That's one of the ways she found out her husband had been killed. So it's not obvious that it's true that politicians are more distrusted now than before. I do worry a bit about a situation in which votes fragment and the electoral system completely doesn't represent it. But the problem is, if we have an executive in Parliament, in other words, if the Prime Minister is chosen by Parliament and by dint of being in Parliament is able to govern the country, if you then fragment Parliament in such a way that they're relying on lots of different parties to agree with each other, I think it could be difficult. When the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives got together, they formed a stable government. Lots of people quite liked that mixture. But the problem is that what you can get is total fragmentation. And we saw how incredibly destabilising that was during the Brexit debate, when nobody could actually do anything. The Parliament couldn't deliver what the Brexit referendum had called for.
Yeah, but hold on, because we've had very recently a situation where the Tories had a majority and many people will be at home pushing back, shouting, even when they had that majority, they didn't achieve things like the Rwanda plan. It was frustrated at so many different points and turns. Yeah. So it's kind of...
People don't like that, though, do they, Michelle? So that's exactly... I mean, in some ways... I think it's right that there should be some institutional breaks on popular enthusiasms, right? Because I think it should take time to change laws. I think we should have time to consider them. We should have time to review them. And I don't mind the fact that there is a bit of a break for consideration. So I don't want a sort of unmediated, direct democracy. But you do want a parliament that has a clear outcome. And I think that would be a big loss if we didn't have it. I'm not virulently against it because I think I can see some circumstances if the right completely splinters and reform could end up taking, let's say a third of the vote of the right, maybe even 40% of the vote of the right, and still not getting any seats. The Conservative Party would get very few seats in that, and then the right at about 33% of the electorate, but with almost no seats. I think that's.
But then aren't you then making the argument for proportional?
No, that is an argument for it. Yeah, I am. But I'm saying that and if that were to persist, then I think we will eventually end up reviewing what the electoral system is. But I don't think that's a good way of governing. So what I think is that the right should be able to unite behind one proposition.
But that's never going to happen.
I don't see the right, by the way, as being necessarily the Farageist right. I mean, I think the right should unite to the centre, but that's my particular twist on it.
Go on, what are you going to say?
But if you look at the 1918 report on proportional, on, electoral reform, they make a really good point. They say ultimately a general election is a referendum on who is going to form a government, right? It's that one or that one choice. And what we will get is a genuine, acceptance of, we hope, a Labour government, and that will have democratic legitimacy. But if you look at Italy, if you look at Israel, if you look at these countries with proportional representation, the standing of the political class is even lower than here. And so it's not in any way a palliative, Michelle, for disaffection.
Right. I also, one of the conclusions that my grandfather reached when he'd come through the Soviet Union, he'd gone to Siberia, he'd come to this country via Palestine and Iraq and Uzbekistan and Iran, he thought this country was very well governed. And one of his reasons was it wasn't corrupt. And I think we think of our country and our politicians as it's all a total failure and it's completely corrupt. Actually, we live in quite a good country with a lot of good things to be said about it. So I kick back a bit about people who think, there are things that are wrong in the political environment and there are things to be said. I think politicians do make, because they think voters want them, promises they then can't reach.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what some people might say goes wrong in the political system, and that is the House of Lords. I've had quite a few people getting in touch about that already. So let's come back after the break, shall we, and look at whether or not it's time to reform the second chamber, and if so, with what? What would it look like? Your thoughts. See you in 2.
Evening, time for your latest weather from the Met Office here on GB News. For many of us, it's been a fine day today. Tomorrow, a very different story. A cold start and then it'll turn wet, and particularly in the west, very windy. Here's the reason why. A couple of sets of weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic. Ahead of that, we've had a ridge of high pressure, which, as I said, has brought most of us a fine day. Still 1 or 2 showers over northeast Scotland and eastern England, but they are fading away, and generally it's going to be a dry night with some lengthy clear spells, and that's why it's going to turn chilly. Temperatures well down into single digits, even in towns and cities, and some rural spots even lower. So yes, another pretty fresh start tomorrow. Generally a dry and a bright start, but not everywhere. Here comes the rain trickling in towards Northern Ireland and West Wales, along with southwest England. So rapidly clouding over in the southwest through the morning. Much of the Midlands and eastern England will start dry, and with a bit of sunshine, temperatures will soon start to lift. But turning wet across Northern Ireland, it's going to be a soggy day here, increasingly windy too. Most of Scotland will start dry again, though. A cold start here. And then steadily as we go through the day, the cloud and the rain across Northern Ireland will start to spread its way into southwest Scotland up towards the central belt. The rain drifting into Wales and southwest England by lunchtime, and then through the afternoon, some of that rain getting into northern England and the Midlands. Much of eastern England will stay dry through most of the day, along with northern Scotland. But in the west, not only turning wet, but also windy. Unusually windy around these western coasts through the afternoon. Again, feeling pretty cool, particularly with the wet and the windy weather that's moved across northern Scotland for Friday, where it may well linger. Elsewhere on Friday, it's a blustery, gusty day with, yes, some decent spells of sunshine, but a whole raft of showers. So very changeable through Friday. 1 minute it's dry, the next minute you've got a downpour, and that showery picture continuing into the weekend and staying on the cool side.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner with the latest on the M62 in West Yorkshire. The westbound exit slip road is partly blocked to the Chain Bar roundabout just south of Bradford at the M606 at the scene of a crash. It's queuing nearly back to the Tingley turnoff. On the M56 in Cheshire, 2 lanes are out westbound just before the M6 at the scene of an accident. And the A46 Lincoln bypass closed again today between the Highcombe roundabout and the Wispy Road roundabout, this time due to an accident. The Surrey stretch of the M25 down to 2 lanes clockwise 11 to 12 after a lorry caught fire just north of the M3. Recovery work is underway. And on the western stretch clockwise, the left lane shut just north of the M40 following an accident. And if you're heading into London on the M4, the exit slip road partly blocks junction 3, the A312 Hayes exit. Recovery works underway where a car's broken down. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. I've got Lord Finkelstein alongside me and Lord Glassman. Let's cut to the chase and talk about reform of the House of Lords. One of my viewers, you cheeky so-and-so, you wrote in and said that you regard it as a luxurious retirement home and said that it needs to be scrapped. Tim says it worked better with hereditary peers. Goodness me. Like the monarchy, says Kath, the House of Lords is a part of British culture. Whether or not we like it is irrelevant. We can't change it, and its historical prominence. Well, we can change it, I suspect. Should we change it or not?
Well, I'm in favour of changing it, but I'm not in favour of abolishing it. The reason I'm in favour of changing it is I think there's a problem with the way people are appointed. There's no suitability filter. I think it's ridiculous, personally, to have hereditary peer by-elections, so you're constantly replacing the hereditary peers that are on it. So I think there's a case for reform. If you abolished it, you would either end up with a House of Lords that did everything the government wanted to do. So you'd have a Labour majority in the Commons and one in the Lords, or you'd have a Labour majority in the Commons and a Tory majority in the Lords, and the result would be complete deadlock. If you don't have a written constitution, it's very difficult to limit the powers of the Lords. The Lords would take every opportunity, because they're in another party, to stop the Commons doing anything. So I think if you wanted to abolish, if you really feel strongly enough about it, you can abolish the Lords altogether, have one Parliament. I don't think that's a good idea. So I think there's something to be said for a limited Parliament in which you do say people have got to be of high calibre. There shouldn't be a retirement home. I think in most cases it actually isn't. I think people put a lot of work into it and concentrate on it, on their task of legislating quite well. But if there is a feeling, look, we cannot have this undemocratic House, then I don't think we should have one at all.
Morris?
You know, I've really changed my mind since I went into the Lords, so I need to talk about that. The first and most important thing is that our job in the Lords is to advise and amend, and so we don't challenge the primacy of the Commons. And so we do have a democratic system where ultimately the Commons is primary within the balance of interests. The other thing I want to say about the House of Lords, which was a big surprise to me because I really didn't pay any attention to it before, is that unlike the Commons, it really does have people who know what they're talking about. It does have genuine expertise within it. We've got the ex-army people, we've got scientists, we've got people who are actually very distinguished. You've got the bishops. So, you know, obviously, given that it actually, for no reason whatsoever, works very well, I understand why people want to abolish it, because, you know, that's how life goes. I put forward suggestions, for example, that it should represent the working life of the country. You know, that people should be elected, you know, for 10-year periods. From nurses should elect a representative, you know, almost like a corporate body that has the experience of the working life. That's the crucial thing.
But there are people in the Lords like
there really are.
If we reform the appointments procedure enough, you would make sure that you got. But there is some effort is taken to see whether we can.
You know, but Danny, I would take a radical view about the corruption, which is that people get the sense that you can buy it for party donations, for giving. Yeah. So I would get rid of any Lord that gave a political party more than 50 grand.
So I wouldn't do that. But what I would do, because I think, you know, business people might well donate to a political party, but also be good people who represent kind of what business does in the House of Lords, and some of those are very good contributors to the Lords' work. What I would do is insist on a suitability filter. So the House of Lords Appointments Commission at the moment, they can only kick it back to the Prime Minister if they think that person's been involved in something that lacks integrity, that's scandalous. And the Prime Minister can then override that. Normally doesn't do that, but they can. What they should do is to say, we actually think this person has integrity, but they're not a suitable appointment. And
what would the suitability criteria be?
Whether they could contribute to the work of the House of Lords, filled a function that maybe wasn't fulfilled by other members in the chamber, had sufficient standing.
But I hope it wouldn't be an educational suitability.
No, but had sufficient standing to contribute. So you would definitely want to make sure that we had nursing people represented, but they would be to do with their record.
But would you add a time limit to this? Because you two are very nice chaps, but you've got life peerages. I don't think that's right or proper. I think it should be timed.
I'm relaxed about it, but the only thing about it is you would lose some expertise. Speaking for myself, I wouldn't miss it. It's actually quite hard work.
Is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. I mean, if if you engage in it, it is. You don't have to do it, but if you do it, it's quite hard work. So I wouldn't. It's not something I cling on to desperately, to be honest.
Really? Well, if anyone wants to put me in the House of Lords, I'll be there quicker than a quick thing from Quickland.
Michelle, I don't think you get through.
My life.
Don't think you get through the suitability criteria, Michelle.
Did you hear that? He doesn't think that I would pass the suitability. Right, I'm going to sort him out in the break. When I come back, I want to talk to you about whether or not you think that we should bring the industry back to the UK. What would that look like? See you in 2.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Tens of thousands of British troops joined Allied nations storming the beaches of Normandy.
D-Day opened the long-awaited second front, of course, helping to liberate France from Nazi rule. So this isn't just a commemoration, is it, of the history, Cameron? It's very much a royal event.
Yeah, it absolutely is, because as we said earlier, the King, and by extension the royal family, has an incredibly important relationship with the armed forces. The King is Colonel-in-Chief, the head of the armed forces, so he knows the sacrifices that these people make. And his grandfather, of course, was monarch during World War II, and he spoke of his grandfather's frustration that he couldn't go across to Normandy on D-Day itself because it was far too dangerous. The British government wouldn't let him. Similarly with Churchill as well. But what he would have done is heard the stories from his grandfather and also his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. So the King and the Queen heard all these harrowing stories. And I think with all of that in mind, when we saw them yesterday in Portsmouth, I think the emotion perhaps overwhelmed the Queen, as we've seen on the front pages this morning. The King looked visibly moved as well. He gave a very heartfelt speech.
And the King and the Queen during the war, Cameron, were incredibly important part of it, because there was a suggestion that the Queen and her children, which had been Princess Margaret and the future Queen, should be moved to Canada, to live in Canada during the war to protect them. And she said, I go where my husband goes. So she stayed in Britain. They stayed in Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace took bombs during the Blitz. There was the famous moment when she went to the East End and said, I can now look you in the eye, because the palace had taken bombs too. And the King's broadcasts, they were incredibly important to keep the British morale going.
They absolutely were, and the King did eventually go and visit the Normandy beaches around 10 days after.
The People's Channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but actually, it's about you.
And we won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear
all sides
as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, Just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Nothing personal.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. I've got alongside me Lord Finkelstein, and he's still here, Lord Glassman. He's just told me, in case you've just tuned in, that I wouldn't pass the test to get into the House of Lords.
Well,
Goodness
I was
gracious
just more
me.
interested in what those suitability tests would be.
The SDP, the Social Democrat Party, they also released their manifesto today. I found it very interesting. There was lots of stuff in there. One of the key points that they were making is that it was time, they said, to reindustrialise the UK, to bring the industry back. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with that. So my wing of the Labour Party, Blue Labour, has been historically absolutely committed to reindustrialisation. I think this is the huge issue. I mean, Danny, you've got a history with the SDP.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear. But this is the essential thing that's not going on in this election, because what we found out in COVID, Michelle, was that we couldn't even make face masks. I mean, the industrial decimation was very profound. Now we've got this war in Ukraine. A lot of our kit doesn't work. There definitely needs to be a revival of industry for the sake of our democratic sovereignty and our own independence. And so in this case, I think the SDP are on the right track.
Do you agree with that?
I was an SDP candidate in 1987 when they supposedly did. In fact, they supposedly did the last manifesto in 1987. Actually, I was on the manifesto committee. The SDP didn't have a manifesto then, because that was SDP Liberal Alliance.
Right.
And this isn't really the same body. No. But it's a very interesting body, because Nigel Farage, while he is a social conservative, is an economic liberal.
Mm.
The only political party that's trying to combine, as it were, a kind of protectionist, nationalist economic policy with a protectionist, nationalist social policy is the SDP. That makes them quite intellectually interesting to me. I don't think they're a continuation of the SDP.
I mean, you might say...
They are interesting. I am in favour of an industrial strategy, and I was very disappointed the Conservative Party decided to move away from that under Liz Truss, but I think it was a mistake. But I don't think protectionism, which they're proposing, where we have to buy British. You know, if you get all of the British public services to buy British, it increases public spending costs without delivering. So I'm not in favour of that.
Boris?
Yeah, it's not quite like what they're saying is that there should be that local authorities and government bodies should buy British. That's not exactly protectionism. That's just certain preferences in government policy, and you know. Maybe there are circumstances, because we've reached the end of global. So this is a hugely momentous time in history with seemingly a very trivial general election going on. But one of the issues is, you know, how do we function now that globalisation and all the assumptions of the previous consensus that we've lived throughout our lifetimes, Danny, are breaking down. So how do you respond to the emergence of China? How do we rebuild our defence industry? All of these are absolutely fundamental questions. Now, obviously, Michelle, I would like to see raised in the general election, so I appreciate you raising it here. And I think that this idea of industrial strategy is absolutely fundamental.
One of my viewers, Terry, he's got in touch and said, Michelle, Danny is exactly what is wrong with the so-called right wing. He is a centrist and he wants to pull the Tories into the centre alongside the Liberals and Labour. It's meaning, he says, that there's zero choice, that all the big parties are the same, and that's where reform comes in.
The Conservative Party is a broad church, and I'm on one. I'm in
but
one
he's
part.
Laughing at that. Why are you
I'm in
laughing at
one
that?
part of it, right? So obviously it doesn't cover the whole political spectrum, but it's broader than just me, and I completely admit that I am much closer to the centre, but I do belong distinctively to the centre-right, and there's a big difference between the centre-right and the centre-left.
You know, I always say, Danny, that I'm much too conservative to ever be a member of the Conservative Party, so I relate to what that is that there is a fundamental lack of justice. And I don't think our politics has adjusted to the huge changes that are going on in the world, so I am concerned. So the reason I'm laughing is that any time there is a debate in Labour that's unresolved, we say we're a broad church.
So
that's the
question.
If it's a very brief one, because we've got about 40 seconds
industrial
left.
policy, is that a right-wing or a left-wing policy? Right? Am I right? Am I in rejecting nationalist purchase?
OK, I've got to come in there.
Am I right-wing or left-wing in saying that?
It's neither, and you've got to say that Stanley Baldwin really did have an industrial strategy. What's noticeable is that Labour had one in '64, we haven't had one since, and, you know, it
wasn't a big success in '64, was it?
Well, it only lasted till '66. So what I'm saying is we haven't really had an industrial strategy since the 1960s, and how we do that and the role of precious minerals and how we organise our educational system, vocation, is central to that.
Well, there you go. Many of you getting in touch and saying, all right, just quick 2 seconds each. Give me the main difference you think between Labour and Tory, really quick.
Well, Tories want to limit public spending and the Labour Party want to put up taxes.
Yours, quickly? 2 seconds.
Labour is fundamentally committed to quality public service.
There you go. We've got to go. Don't go anywhere, though, because Camilla is up next. Night-night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, time for your latest weather from the Met Office here on GB News. For many of us, it's been a fine day today. Tomorrow, a very different story. A cold start and then it'll turn wet, and particularly in the west, very windy. Here's the reason why. A couple of sets of weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic. Ahead of that, we've had a ridge of high pressure, which, as I said, has brought most of us a fine day. Still 1 or 2 showers over northeast Scotland and eastern England, but they are fading away, and generally it's going to be a dry night with some lengthy clear spells, and that's why it's going to turn chilly. Temperatures well down into single digits, even in towns and cities, and some rural spots even lower. So yes, another pretty fresh start tomorrow. Generally a dry and a bright start, but not everywhere. Here comes the rain trickling in towards Northern Ireland and West Wales, along with southwest England. So rapidly clouding over in the southwest through the morning. Much of the Midlands and eastern England will start dry, and with a bit of sunshine, temperatures will soon start to lift. But turning wet across Northern Ireland, it's going to be a soggy day here, increasingly windy too. Most of Scotland will start dry again, though. A cold start here. And then steadily as we go through the day, the cloud and the rain across Northern Ireland will start to spread its way into southwest Scotland up towards the central belt. The rain drifting into Wales and southwest England by lunchtime, and then through the afternoon, some of that rain getting into northern England and the Midlands. Much of eastern England will stay dry through most of the day, along with northern Scotland. But in the west, not only turning wet, but also windy. Unusually windy around these western coasts through the afternoon. Again, feeling pretty cool, particularly with the wet and the windy weather that's moved across northern Scotland for Friday, where it may well linger. Elsewhere on Friday, it's a blustery, gusty day with, yes, some decent spells of sunshine, but a whole raft of showers. So very changeable through Friday. 1 minute it's dry, the next minute you've got a downpour.